Before anyone has any bright ideas for a joke, no, I don't mean I'm giving up entirely on Doctor Who, including reviews. You're not getting rid of me that easily. I'm entirely referring to watching new Doctor Who, as it comes out, and how the end of this most recent series has finally been the straw that has broken the camel's back with me. To quote a completely different science fiction series, the line must be drawn here. This far, no further. I want two things to be clear before I get into the details of why I feel this way. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, if you are looking for a I am stopping watching Doctor Who because it's gone woke video, then stop watching here because this video is not going to be that. There is no shortage of useless grifters complaining about woke or we spouting all that crap, so you can go find them, you won't get any of it from me. Secondly, and a little less bluntly put, I'm not approaching this as someone who would their nostalgia for the first RTD era whittle away over time, because I'm pretty critical about the whole of NuWho's existence, and I haven't been completely enamoured with the brilliance of RTD1 since I was about 11 years old. Looking back now, 2 decades on, in my late 20s and with something approaching critical faculties I did not have as a child, I can see that RTD1 had some heights, but had many flaws that ultimately have proven to be endemic to NuWho. This isn't why isn't Doctor Who as good as I remember it being my childhood, it's, well, why has it stopped reaching even the low bar it was reaching then? Before I talk about me personally, I think it's important to see the context in which Doctor Who currently exists. I think it's fair to say the show is in the biggest hole it's been in since the revival. Its cultural relevance is sub-zero, the viewership is further dwindling, there hasn't been fan harmony for such a long time, I think we've all forgotten what that was actually like. And while obviously there's little we know about this at the moment, and it'll probably be a while before we found out any details, by all accounts it is an absolute fucking train wreck behind the scenes at the moment. It's fair to say it's not in a healthy place, and with the Disney money almost certainly being pulled, its future is very uncertain. How did we get here? How did we go from the show being the biggest thing on TV in the late 2000s, and continuing a solid following and popularity level into the first half of the 2010s, to the point where the 50th anniversary felt like a nationwide event, to now where it feels like the plug is moments away from being pulled? Well, I think we got here two ways. Firstly, something that the people behind the show had no real control over, and then something they definitely did. First of all, over the past 10 years, media consumption has changed completely beyond recognition. What Doctor Who was for the first 5 decades or so of its existence is something that no longer exists. The family show everyone sits down to watch at Saturday tea time and enjoys together just doesn't exist anymore. Streaming is now the dominant form of TV, where people are no longer dictated by the schedule. If you want to watch something with a family or even just on your own, you can do it whenever you want. Hell, I genuinely can't remember the last time I actually watched Doctor Who on its actual broadcast time. So this breakaway from TV as a family event on a set schedule to something everyone would do at their own time is precisely something that would hurt a family show like Doctor Who. The first time I watched the show was watching Rose on its initial broadcast with my family. That simply could not happen today. The streaming era has resulted in the decline of broadcast television as a medium as a whole, and it's important to remember this when talking about the show's decline. I've said it before that if the classic series had survived beyond 1989, it simply wouldn't have been able to survive long within the TV environment of the 90s because of how it changed so much. Arguably, Doctor Who has failed to adapt to the 2020s in the same way. But again, how adaptable was it really? Probably not very much, but these are things we'll look at throughout this video. It's also the case that the show's audience has changed, and as a result shrank, because the audience of children a lot of us, including myself, were when the show was initially revived, flat out does not exist anymore. It's possible it didn't even exist 10 years ago, but it certainly doesn't now when Fortnite and TikTok are the ways the youngs are entertained now. Yes, that might be a sweeping generalisation, but I can't imagine something like Doctor Who not being laughed at as a room as a means of entertaining kids now, and well, that's just how media consumption changes sometimes. Wednesday and the Kiddos was different in the 80s and it wasn't the noughties, and the change is different now. But it means that part of the audience that made Doctor Who the success it was when it initially returned is gone, and there's nothing the show could have possibly done to get them back. The well-known image of the Toys R Us with a wall of Doctor Who's toys is often used as evidence of the show's decline, but a death of that kind of thing was an inevitability far beyond the control of anyone behind the wheel on the show. But then there's the stuff the show did have control over, and one of the most obvious target of my ire throughout this video will be Russell T Davies. Both of the other showrunners NuWho has had, Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall, deserve their share of the blame as well. The decline I think had its origins in the Moffat era, and in particular the reputation the show picked up as well, being convoluted, confusing, a bit up its own arse, and to be frank, pretty cringy. It's important to note that despite the reverence of this era in hindsight by some, not me as anyone who watched my reviews can attest to, but nevertheless, that was overwhelmingly not the response I had from those I knew at the time who were not fans. This probably started with a barely comprehensible mess that is Series 6, but it didn't start showing in the ratings until much later, no doubt buoyed by the enormous success of the 50th anniversary. Nevertheless, the impression was there, and when the fall finally did start coming for Series 9 and 10, I was not surprised, notwithstanding the changes in audience I've already mentioned. Anecdotally, members of my family finally gave up with the series with Sleep No More of all things. The song that living sleep was the straw that broke the camel's back, but make no mistake, it was a feeling that had been built up through years and years of that kind of thing. It wasn't just the one episode, it was the entire feeling of the Moffat era. But honestly, I think a major reason for this was just fatigue. There had been 10 years of NuWho by that point, and people get bored of shit when it's constantly on and constantly coming back to do what feels like the same thing. NuWho's only real invention at that point had been the RTD Moffat boundary, and the changes there were pretty minimal, compared with how often the classic series radically reinvented itself over its 26 years, back when attention spans were much longer. Perhaps NuWho should have radically changed like that, but then it's hard to fault them even in hindsight for changing what seemed to be like a winning formula. And I can only go off my own experience though, and what I saw at the time, people were getting tired of Doctor Who, and this was quickly becoming a problem. And then came Chris Chibnall, and I have absolutely no way of substantiating this, but I've seen a rumour go around that he actually didn't really want the job that much, and only took it because there was nobody else to do it, and well, I would not be surprised. His era was where the decline really happened, and I think creatively there was a lot that went wrong. The first series felt weak and uninspired, with poor characters and a lack of depth. I knew this was going to suck donkey balls when I watched one of the companions run around pretending to be Call of Duty in the second episode, and rarely did the first series, and frankly most of the Chibnall era as a whole, rise above that level. The lack of returning enemies and trying to tell original stories, it was commendable, but it fell flat when there was so little to engage the viewer. The show felt, for the first time, lifeless, something I'd never in a million years accused the Moffat era of being. It just felt like there was no interest in developing things or having interesting drama. It was just there to be Doctor Who, and that's it, and honestly that's the worst thing it could possibly have been. While the ratings curve matched that of other series, I think the relevance of the show really took its plunge here. Interest was revived by the first female Doctor, but it went nowhere when everyone realised they were doing nothing with it, and I went the same for all the other things they were trying to explore. And, well, explore is giving it more credit than it's due, most likely. As for me, I was becoming checked out at this point. I was finding little to really entertain me in these episodes, and in fact the closest I've come to abandoning the series prior to this point was Resolution. I will have much to say about it when I eventually review it in my reviews of the Dalek stories, but the limp plot, inane characters, oh yeah, and the way the story revolved by fucking ovens, showed how pedestrian and dumb the show felt. Clever storytelling was out the window, and we had kids these days look at their phones too much, ha ha jokes, and I reiterate, fucking ovens saving the day. In fact, the year-long break after that episode was probably what prevented that from being the break point for me, as it gave a long time for the stench to be washed away. The second series was the second of the three major ratings declines, and where the floor began to really fall out. The poor reputation of the first probably prevented casual viewers from coming back, and instead of carefully committing to a new approach, it felt like the strange mix between the previous series approach and a new one of complicated arcs and stories, and it just wasn't handled well. It felt disjointed. And remember, when I say complicated arcs, I mean complicated, not complex, because they weren't particularly well thought out or anything like that, just a pale imitation of what a properly thought-out story arc should be. This, of course, culminated in the pathetic overcorrection with The Timeless Child. The first time I truly looked at the show and thought, God, I'd be better off if this shit was never happening. Which, considering I had to sit through Hell-Bent, is pretty impressive. But this will become relevant later. Hold that thought. What I will say about The Timeless Child is that it smelt of pathetic desperation, like Chibnall was trying anything to try and grab interest back, and that it subsequently went absolutely fucking nowhere, shows it was just a desperate ploy, and frankly supports the theory he never wanted a job in the first place, as I find it difficult to believe he introduced this huge change to the show's lore that would be guaranteed to stir fan anger out of genuine passion for it, and then not have a plan to actually do anything with it. More likely, he threw shit at the wall to see what would stick. Another thought you need to hold. Anyway, at this point Chibbers was hit by something that was not his fault. This small virus you might have heard about that was struck around 2020. Yeah, COVID was responsible for the next series, Flux being a clusterfuck. In theory, anyway. At least we can't know for sure it wouldn't have been brilliant otherwise, but frankly at this point who even fucking cares? Ratings had bottomed out, as far as anyone knew. The show was such an afterthought that the first episode of the supposed family series went out on the evening of 31 October, a time when no families have any other activities to do, I'm sure. It's not like they were trying to burn down the show for the insurance money. Honestly, I barely even remember Flux, other than it was limp and went nowhere with its universe-altering events or anything like that. It was just yawn. So that's how we got here. A decline in cultural relevance and a feeling of fatigue with the show that started way back in the Moffat era, combined with the creative failings that led to the show feeling like an afterthought. But Russell T Davies was back. Surely that would fix everything, right? Right? Let me make it clear that when I heard he was coming back, I groaned. Not because I thought the writing was going to be bad, although it turned out to be, and not because the organisation of the show would descend into such a fucking unmitigated disaster like it has, because I at least thought he'd be able to organise everything properly, but because it just stank of desperation. Like a band who hadn't had a proper hit in years re-releasing their greatest hits package, reminding us all of when times were better. And remember, I don't even think the first ITD era was a magical, flawless time either. It just said to me, they could find nobody else, so they're trying to go back to the golden era without thinking at all about why that worked. I was worried, actually, it was just going to be going back to safe retreads of RTD1, and I was right in quite a few ways, in just as many I could not have been more wrong. So I guess I should start talking about my problems with this era, and why they have all piled together to the point where I've given up. Firstly, from the very first episode, the first part of the 60th anniversary, it became blatantly obvious to me that my initial fears about RTD2, there'd just be a way of nostalgia mining for Naughty's Who, and how that episode righted what went wrong with Donna just showed me precisely what I was hoping they would avoid. It was being written for the sole reason of people who remembered those scenes going, I am glad that sad scene is no longer the end of it, and that's all. Irrelevant of how much sense this made as the opening of a new era, admittedly this was not meant as a jumping on point for new viewers, it felt like it was not telling a story for its own sake, but rather just cashing in on nostalgia and re-tying up ends RTD clearly regretted originally tying up. Admittedly, the second episode was more unique, but the third was where this really began to annoy me with... Let's get this out of the way. My generation, I think, just flat out pisses me off as a concept, for a few reasons. Firstly, it is so blatant in how it's been engineered and created to reach a certain outcome for RTD, it's just sad. Yeah, we get it. You want it so you can have your contrived happy ending. It's almost laughable how transparent it is, and it's just poor storytelling. Shoehorning in stuff like that in order to reach your point feels unnatural and lazy. And, well, having an ability like that feels unnatural and lazy, doesn't it? Secondly, it makes no sense. What is the purpose of this ability? Why would it exist? Why are we only seeing it now? Regeneration has been butchered in throughout all of NuWho, but the ability to create a whole new person out of it was treated as this strange aberration that only came about because of extremely unique and irreplicable circumstances, and resulted in the second person not having full-time Lord physiology. You may recall that was written by, oh yes, this fucking numbnut. So even leaving Classic Who and how regeneration was actually established there aside, this just comes out of nowhere. Thirdly, it just feels so desperate, like giving Superman a new power to save the day. It feels like a lazy cheat. The Doctor can now pull this ability out of his arse because why fucking not? It lacks dramatic punch or intrigue because of how lazily arsepulled it is. Finally, there was a worry at the time this would leave the first Black Doctor feeling like an afterthought, like he was not the real Doctor because the Tennant incarnation still existed. This, to be fair, was avoided because the Tennant Doctor has thankfully not showed up since in one of the few good creative decisions made, and B, Ncuti was screwed over in basically every other way. It's difficult to see how it could have hurt much. And this unfortunately became emblematic of the era. Shit pulled out of the arse because it looks and sounds cool and serves a specific end to make its point. Sounds very NuWho, of course, but this is taken to extremes. Firstly though, once the specials were out of the way, the real test began. The big attraction, of course, of this new era was a partnership with Disney, to put Who on Disney Plus for non-British viewers and open up to a whole new audience. Imagine Doctor Who with the same audience as Star Wars. How much could be done with it then? It was exciting to think that. Now, I'll make it clear in theory I don't think this was a bad idea. The put it on the BBC and hope it reaches the British family audience plan was clearly not working by this point, and something new needed to be done. But two fatal mistakes were made with it that doomed the plan from the start. Firstly, it started with The Church on Ruby Road and Space Babies, two god-awful episodes that doomed the whole project to begin with for reasons I'll get to shortly. Secondly, and a bit more pertinently though, I think it had no idea what it wanted its audience to be. I said at the start that the family audience was probably gone, and by the time RTD took over this was obvious. So a new audience had to be found, and I don't think anyone ever really worked out what that new audience would look like. It was kind of forgotten that Star Wars and, hell, even Star Trek, they have huge built-in audiences already. They're widespread cultural phenomena, so that any old bugger will sit down and watch them if you just slap the logo on. Doctor Who wasn't even managing that anymore in its home country, where it's part of the popular culture. It was obviously not going to do that across the globe where it is not. So an audience had to be identified, and it targeted and advertised that audience as something new they should start out with. and I don't think that identification was ever made, and the hope the show would coast on name recognition alone was a naive and foolish one. As I said, those first 2 episodes got awful. Anyone who did give the show a chance for the first time would not have got the idea this was a smart, exciting, relevant, occasionally fun and goofy, but frequently dramatic, but most of all engaging and entertaining show. They would have got the idea this was a show that revelled in its own stupidity, was moronic for its own sake, and had nothing interesting or clever to say, and was not entertaining in how it said it. Frankly, I wouldn't blame them. Singing goblins followed by talking babies is the kind of idiocy that I frankly cannot believe was the product of anything other than insane levels of hubris. When the show initially returned, but nobody had any idea if this would even be successful again, we got Rose. Hardly a flawless or even particularly great episode, but one that got its mission exactly right. Give us an audience identification character, show us an alien invasion, unique monsters, and insight into our main character and what he does, and slowly introduce the audience to the world of Doctor Who. These 2 episodes showed us stupid, goofy monsters that elicited no fear or threat, showed us little of what the Doctor should really be about, and threw us into a world where we're supposed to take this shit at face value. Goofy Doctor Who has its place, but it needs to be intelligent and witty, of which these episodes were neither. And it needs to come at a point where the audience is already familiar with the series. City of Death is wonderful, one of the smartest and funniest stories of all time, but God, it would have been a terrible choice for the second story ever. You might recall that second story ever was instead the Daleks, that demonstrated to the audience the kind of alien menaces the Doctor would be fighting and the kind of adventures he would go on, while also showing how mature his social commentary could be, and not snot monsters. Even putting aside the new viewers, my own patience was dashed by these 2 episodes, which I thought were routinely awful. At the time I laughed at the Charge of Church on Ruby Road as yet another pathetic NuWho episodes, but looking back it should have been a much darker omen, one I only realised when watching Space Babies. That was then followed by The Devil's Cord, which in its way was even worse than the first 2, but I will at some point no doubt review all these episodes, so I won't dwell on the individual ones for too long. But I stuck with it, because, well, I've been watching NuWho for 20 years now, bad episodes are par for the course. Starting out with Series 1, you have long to wait before you reach aliens in London and World War III. But there was nevertheless something different here, an attitude I still can't quite put my finger on. Maybe that this Doctor Who was going to be quirky and different, a more zany experience, and God in heaven was that the worst possible thing to do when everyone wanted boring, reliable Doctor Who back. To be fair to Series 14, the rest of the episodes pre-finale are not as bad. For instance, Boom was a decent Moffat script, something you don't hear very often from me. 73 Yards was an extremely odd experience I don't think really works, but it was nevertheless a bold experiment I think deserves praise for being attempted, etc. and so forth. The finale, well, much has been said by others about this finale, and yes, it is terrible, and yes, I won't dwell on the reasons, but it is emblematic of so many of the problems I mentioned. The laziness of how the final episode pulls off its twists angers me so much. How can you set up a final confrontation where attaching a tow cable pretty much is the solution? How can you have the great mystery of who Ruby's mother is solved by it turning out that she was pointing at a fucking street sign to name her when nobody was around to see it? It felt like RTD was once again trying to cram in story beats that made no sense to fit what he wanted, and therefore the whole thing felt disjointed. But more to that, it seemed to wander so much they had no idea what it actually wanted to really explore. A scene that pisses me off because of the potential is one where the Doctor meets the lady in the post-apocalyptic tent type scene. You know the scene I mean. The guilt the Doctor should feel at this should be a wider factor in the episode at large, a driving force for his character motivations, and it just goes nowhere, it barely comes up. It feels like RTD wrote these episodes entirely for his hype moments and specific beats, and not to actually explore characters or ideas, which is sort of what storytelling is for. But these are criticisms of the episodes themselves that fit more in a review. Why did this piss me off so much and make me want to quit? Well, it didn't. It was bad, but not that bad. I mean, yeah, it was that bad, but, you know, it was NuWho bad, the kind of stuff I've seen before. This is where Series 15 comes in. Let me start by saying the popularity of the show has reached an all-time low. For the first time, it simply cannot be pinned in any reasonable way on the decline of broadcast television or anything like that, because, well, let's have a look at Christmas Day. Other British pop culture icons, like Wallace and Gromit and Gavin and Stacey, did enormous numbers, posting absolutely huge figures you just don't see in any other days than these days. Doctor Who did not. It couldn't even manage 6 million on Christmas Day, the only day of the year when everyone does sit around and watch TV as a family. And it still flopped, and even if it hadn't, it wouldn't have mattered, because it was more confusing and convoluted nonsense. It just goes to show the show's probably terminally wounded, and probably was before this series was even broadcast, and is in need of a miracle now. Of course, this is a good place to discuss the rumours of how insane things behind the scenes have been. Now, they're just rumours, but they've been repeated often enough and make sense from what we've seen. For instance, they include Millie Gibson's getting annoyed at how Ruby was treated in the first series and stepping back, forcing Virada Setu, I have certainly butchered out, I apologise, especially since she is the least culpable person in any of this, forcing her to be cast to replace her at extremely short notice, which is probably why Belinda feels like she doesn't really have a character, beyond maybe a few minor traits in the first episode and that's it. More importantly, though, it's rumoured that the finale was heavily reshot and re-edited a mere weeks before broadcast, to add certain scenes will be discussed shortly. Now, this does explain a lot of the creative failings which led to my patience snapping, but it does not excuse them. For the job of the showrunner is to, run the fucking show, and if you can't do that without all falling apart slapstick style, then maybe this job isn't for you, Russell. Anyway, this series was poor. There were some good ideas. Lux was an interesting idea with butchered execution. The story and the engine explored a culture Doctor Who has never really explored before, but did it in a way that made not the tiniest lick of fucking sense. And I suppose the whale had a bit of tension on its side, but even those episodes fell down in the execution because the style is always more important than the substance, always. It's been a problem across the whole of NuWho, of course, but the way it's just taken over in this new era has grated me, well, to the point of exhaustion. Lux tells a story of an interesting and mysterious alien being preying on the basic human desires to avoid loss and have our loved ones forever. Oh, no, it doesn't. It has a dumb regeneration energy MacGuffin that turns the villain into fucking space Jesus. The story and the engine uniquely explore the culture Doctor Who, a very white British series, let's not forget, hasn't looked at much before. Well, it ends up with the confusing answers being exposited to us, while we use past clips from the show in a way that becomes grating with how repetitive a solution has become. Meanwhile, there's the Interstellar Storm contest, which touches the hot stove of genocide in today's political climate, and the execution managed to piss off just about everyone because RTD is both completely incapable of introducing nuance and also incapable of understanding why a wishy-washy answer is not going to cut it for this topic. How in the hell he managed to do both at once is beyond me, but he manages it. And I reserve a fresh space in hell for Lucky Day, which almost made me quit there and then, with the lame, cliche, tired bullshit that made me hate everyone involved. But then the finale, and this was it. The last straw. I'll bring in a thought I asked you to hold earlier, throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. And this was throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks, the story. Throw in the Rani, and Omega, and Susan, and Rogue from the last series, and Ruby and Mel and Kate and all the unit lot and the hotel from the rubbish Christmas special nobody watched, and throw it all in there without thinking for a second about what he wants to do with any of it. What do we learn about the Rani? What do we get from her character and her interactions with the Doctor? Nothing! In her original appearance, she was an interesting counterpoint to the Doctor, a lesson perhaps in what he would be like without his morality and decency, an important lesson given the Sixth Doctor was in the middle of being such an arsehole, to show that despite that he was still the man who cared. Here, she's just a master but a bit more girl boss. Omega, what the fuck was he doing here? He's used as a scary word and that's it. He might as well not even be Omega. He has so little to do with him. Now, I know RTD knows what Omega really is, that he's actually from the antimatter universe, not some generic underworld, so deliberately ignoring it is all the more offensive to me. And no, God forbid am I suggesting more callbacks and continuity. I'm not saying that we need to recite the plot of the Three Doctors or anything, but this appearance is like if the Doctor saw the Dalek in Dalek. Instead of what actually happened, the Dalek declared it wanted to eat people's brains. Just completely out of step with what they are as a villain, and the same happened with Omega here. But again, shit, wall, see what sticks. Susan's appearance was shockingly disrespectful, and yes, I know she was barely in the finale and was actually in the song contest episode, but it still counts because she was obviously meant to do more than got canned in reshoots, probably. The last surviving performing link to the show's origins, and she basically does nothing of note. But then it begs the question, why is she even fucking here? It's just throwing shit at the wall to, say it with me, see what fucking sticks. And it's not sticking, is it? Then there's the political stuff, which appears to be making fun of right-wing incels and their trad fantasies, which, fair enough, typical target and all that. But what does it have to say about that? That it's bad, and we should oppose it. Right, well, I did already oppose it, because I'm not some right-wing neckbeard angry that I have to have a shower before women will talk to me, so got anything else to say, Russell? Oh yes, that actually women should be mothers and raising children, of course. How stupid of me. Oh, God. This brings us to Poppy. She is a good way to demonstrate how disjointed everything feels, and how utterly wretched the execution of all this is. This character, from goddamn fucking Space Babies of all things, appears out of nowhere and is suddenly significant because the exposition tells us to. In the most confusing cliffhanger of all time, the Doctor just straight up tells us, oh, she's my daughter now. Which, of course, leads it to turning out the Time Lords are sterile. Something that comes out of nowhere and leads nowhere, and offers no explanation as to when and how, but those are minor things according to RTD. Not according to me, but according to RTD. Of course, for one terrible, horrible moment, I thought looms were about to be made canon, so my relief when it turned out that this was not the case probably made me more disposed of this lazy, rank amateur bullshit than I probably should have been, but luckily RTD managed to get Matt back on track with the bizarre poppy stuff later in the episode. Everyone in the end forgets her, this so important baby we've been told about, and not really seen, but oh well, and is the most important person ever, we reshaped the Time Lords, or whatever the hell it was. Everyone forgets her, except Ruby, because... Anyway, while this still would have been an absolutely terrible episode, this would have been a good place to end. A tragic ending where someone so important has been forgotten. And who knows, perhaps pre-reshoot that wasn't what was intended. But no, the Doctor goes and sacrifices himself to save her for extremely flimsy reasons. Which leads to it turning out Belinda was her mother the whole time, and her life is now dedicated to raising this child. Look, I will not for a moment talk down mothers and the wonderful things they do, and how important motherhood is to some women. But there are two blatantly obvious flaws with this. Firstly, at no point was it even remotely suggested in Belinda's character that this was somewhere she was leading, so this is a character assassinating arseball at best. And secondly, and this goes back to what I mentioned, the political stuff. Why the fuck would you put that in an episode where the villain is a right-wing incel who thinks all women should be mothers and nothing else? You fucking stupid bellend! Did you not even think for a minute, Russell, about why that might be a bad look? Congratulations, you have now reduced Belinda to the level that incel arsehole took her down to. Way to go, Russell. See what I mean? Just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. It's a disjointed, convoluted mess of different arseballs and plot twists, each designed to be more infuriating than the last. The return of the Rani after so many years might as well not have happened with how little they do with her. Omega, a villain with so much potential, reduced to a CGI growling nothing. Female companions treated as disposable, and of course the Doctor's own character arc being practically non-existent, going back and forth like a fucking yo-yo. The story is a disaster. And yet, it wouldn't have been enough to make me stop. But bad finales come and go with NuWho. I'm old enough to remember the power of love making the Doctor come back to life and defeat the Master, whatever the fuck that was. This is by far and away the worst, one of the worst episodes in the show's history, and frankly I contend it would kill the moon for the bottom spot if I'm honest, but still not quite enough. What happened next finally did it for me. This brings me to the other thing I mentioned earlier. The feeling I got with a timeless child, looking at the show's past and history being butchered for no reason other than the showrunner wanting something to do, and wishing this shit never happened. I got up with my generation. This breaks everything and is a completely unnecessary addition. It makes things seem weak and stupid retroactively, and that's the last thing you ever want to do. Imagine if after his heroic sacrifice for Perry, the Fifth Doctor instead split in two, and the Sixth Doctor was now just there just as well, instead of being born from his ashes. Congratulations, you've retroactively made one of the greatest scenes in Doctor Who's history seem stupid. I got that so many times in this finale, with the Rani, with the almost looms, with Omega, so many stupid canon-breaking shit. And I want to make it clear, this is not because I'm some fan who counts the rivets in every episode and complains when a one-off line in the Third Doctor story is contradicted. But it's more deep than that. It feels like it's taking the show I loved and tearing it apart. Instead of creating new things to base the stories on and create interesting drama, it feels as to butcher the past instead, and make the show I fell in love with unrecognisable. And well, there's one final scene but took it just a smidge too far. I think perhaps casting Ncuti Gatwa in the first place was probably a mistake. Don't get me wrong, I've loved this Doctor, his performances have been the bright spot in this otherwise dogshit era, but casting an up-and-coming star whose availability was going to dictate the schedule, and for whom any uncertainty would be a damage to his career, he just wasn't going to be able to accept that kind of damage. It was probably a mistake, and it was that uncertainty even though that drove him to leave at the last minute. And there was simply no universe in which that was going to be handled well. A departure like that was never going to be on the show's own terms, only Ncuti's, and he had every right for that to be the case, of course, and I can hardly blame him for choosing his long-term career over Doctor Who. He's a great actor who deserves superstardom, and I'm sure he'll get it. His departure and the circumstances it resulted in are entirely the fault of RTD and his wheezes that left the show in such a precarious position, but all of that is academic compared to the decision of how to replace him. Yeah, you knew this was coming. Bringing in Billie Piper to be the new Doctor is the last straw. I don't have anything against Billie Piper, of course. I think her performances actually were the only thing that saved Rose a lot of the time for me, but it doesn't matter. She doesn't belong here. She shouldn't be doing this. And RTD shouldn't be dragging in nostalgia bait actors from the past to do this. It's the ultimate in his failures. Throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. Abso-fucking-lutely. This is desperation defined. Throwing a big shiny thing at the audience to distract us from how fucked everything is. It's insulting to my intelligence as a fan, and as a viewer to expect me to take this as anything other than desperate flailing, as if seeing a familiar face will make all the bullshit disappear. And then, of course, shit that breaks the show as it was. Why would I expect a proper regeneration into a new actor, want to take the show forward and one where I felt we've left one era and entered another? That's only, what the show has done going back to the 10th planet and the power of the Daleks. Is that just throw a curveball at us? A real surprise, as in a surprise at how stupid one man can be. It's a unique and quirky thing to do. When I say unique and quirky, I mean imbecilic. It's frankly insulting, even more so when the Doctor decides to leave Earth to its fate to make Clara look good, and I never thought that would be topped. It's Doctor Who leaving good storytelling behind in the dust, and finally embracing that style and spectacle beating all. It's just nostalgia bait crap. Let's bring in, someone you recognise. That'll make everything better. It's just stupid and lazy. And I hate it so much, and it is the final straw. Doctor Who's ratings have plummeted, and now overnight figures are barely hitting 2 million if they're lucky, and consolidated figures are rarely reaching 4 now. It's not sustainable. The Disney money's going, and the show's future looks extremely uncertain, and frankly I think cancellation is now the most likely option, and I'm surprised by how many people think it won't happen. But either way, that's it. One wheeze too many, one stupid decision, one idiotic twist too many for me. I've been more than patient, but Doctor Who as a show is dead. It is no more. It has ceased to be. It has gone to join the choir invisible. It is an ex-science fiction show. And bringing in Billie Piper to play the Doctor is not going to make the parrot go boom. So, I hope you've enjoyed this half informative, half rant about why I'm giving up on the new Doctor Who. And I'm going to hope this sticks. Maybe if everyone comes around and says that the next series is the greatest thing ever, maybe I might change my mind there. But somehow I don't think that's going to happen. And, well, I just can't be asked of it anymore. So, that's the video. If you're missing an actual review, fear not, those will restart in 2 weeks unscheduled. But I feel this had to be got off my chest. And if you've tuned into this video because of its clickbait title or an intrigue to see more, then please do subscribe and check out some of my reviews to see if they're up your street. Thanks for watching.